I mean, come on. Creativity benefits from limitations. I put it plain and simple there. That's my first controversial thing in this interview.
Welcome to The Line of Fire, the Sharkmob game dev podcast. If you're not familiar with us, we're a AAA studio based in Malmö, Sweden, specializing in online multiplayer shooters. As we speak, we're finalizing the development of Exoborne, our first original title, a tactical open-world extraction shooter set in the United States torn apart by apocalyptic forces of nature. I'm Martin Hultberg, I'm the host of this episode. I'm also narrative director on Exoborne, and another one of those industry veterans. I worked for years across many games, including IP director for Tom Clancy's Division, before I co-founded Sharkmob. I also have the dubious pleasure, or actual pleasure, of being CMCO, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer, so I wear many hats. So why a podcast? Well, I think this is where I'm going off script, actually. I promised people I would read a script, but now I'm going rogue. I wanted us to do a podcast because marketing-wise, you tend to focus on a small, very precise part of your product that you talk about so you can reach out to the largest possible audience. And that always leaves you with a fairly big amount of unsung heroes and untold stories from behind the scenes of when you develop a game. And that's kind of what I wanted the Line of Fire to focus on, all those stories that never get told in the main marketing campaign. In today's episode, we're going to explore what it takes to work with narrative and writing in games and how to break into an industry that's as competitive as it is creative. We're going to start with a conversation between myself and an old friend, Richard Dansky, who's narrative director at Romero Games. I met him at GDC earlier this year. We had a talk a bit about our history, our legacy. We worked together before at games like the Rainbow Six games and the Division game. He also has a background even further back than that with White Wolf and Vampire the Masquerade, so there's an obvious connection to our Blood Hunt game there. And then we're going to shift gears and go inside our own studio and sit down with our in-house lore master, Jimmy Wilhelmsson, to talk about how he got into this line of work and what it means to be a narrative lore master on a game like Exoborne. Jimmy is also an interesting person. He has a bunch of hats outside of work. He looks at different tabletop scenarios. He writes books about history in the industry, about different types of games. So I suspect that will be an interesting talk. So whether you're an aspiring writer or just curious how the narrative magic happens, this one's for you. Let's do it.
So this is Martin Hultberg at GDC, and now I found Richard Dansky, who I first got to know very many years ago when he was working with Clancy stuff at Red Storm. And later he moved on to become the lead Clancy writer. He might tell us exactly what that means. He's one of the few writers I know that have been experiencing writing from many different perspectives in games and also outside of games, writing books. And I believe he even started his career writing for role-playing games, but he might elaborate on that. So Richard, could you give us an intro of who you are and some of your background and what you're doing here at GDC?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Richard Dansky, currently the narrative director at Romero Games. For 23 years prior to this, I worked at Ubisoft, largely as a central Clancy writer, which meant serving as sort of a central narrative authority on the Tom Clancy series of games. And that meant everything from just gut-checking storylines and making sure we weren't doing things in the same city 3 games in a row, to writing a whole script soup to nuts from the beginning to the end. Prior to that, I worked in tabletop role-playing games and LARPs with White Wolf Game Studios, working on the legendary World of Darkness tabletop setting, and also their LARP iteration of that, as well as their other games like Exalted and Trinity.
Beyond that, you've written quite a few books as well, right?
Yes, I've published 8 novels and 2 short story collections. My 9th novel's coming out next year. It's called Nightmare Logic. And this year I have a nonfiction book coming out called The Video Game Writer's Guide to Surviving the Industry That Hates You.
So the interesting thing, I think, I didn't reflect on this when I first got to know you because I didn't think about it at all, but your start and a lot of your interest seems to lie in horror. Yet you spent many years with Clancy, which is scary in a way, but it's definitely not horror the way we usually define it, right? But I think you still added, to me as someone who worked on Clancy stuff and interacted with you more than as the central Clancy writer, approving stuff I did or coaching me to get to the point we wanted to come as a bigger company. How did you find that journey between horror and contemporary thriller, which, you know, was very realistic, grounded in reality and authentic and all of that stuff, compared to fantastical or horrific?
Well, it starts with the fact that I think horror is a mood. Horror is not a specific set of ingredients. You don't have to have a vampire. You don't have to have a werewolf. It is a mood of fear and helplessness and terrible things about to happen. And so you can incorporate that in everything from the cosmic tentacleness of Lovecraft to techno-thriller stuff where you have a deadly virus that's about to be unleashed. And there's real horror in The Division, for example. The stories that we told in that space, you know, how many dead Santa Clauses do we have?
Quite a few.
That's horror. And
right.
So it was taking that mood and seeing where it was applicable. The other half of the equation is that I actually grew up really being interested in a lot of military history, particularly American Civil War history, but a whole lot of John Keegan and other authors of that ilk as I was growing up. And so the interest was there in tactics and strategy and military stuff, and in how those stories could be interestingly told in a way that was other than just the combat. The reasons for the combat were always at least as important to me as the combat that was actually happening, and framing the Clancy stories in that way enabled me to, I think, tell more interesting and better ones.
So it's one thing to act as the writer of a game or a book. It's another thing to help guide a writer or to actually, in a way, approve their work. How do you work with other writers the best way when you're trying to coach them or guide them, and you sort of hold the IP or the keys to the kingdom in that sense? How does that work?
The whole point of working with another writer is that you want what they can do. You don't want them to try and read your mind and do what you would have written, because if that's the case, you should have just written yourself in the first place. You want them to bring their unique perspective and talent and phrasing and skill to the problem and create something unique that is theirs, that takes advantage of what they are the only ones they can do. And so when I give feedback, what I do is try to keep a few things in mind. One, it is always about the writing. It is never about the writer. It is always, what is this content? Does it meet the needs? If it does, great. Thank you for doing this. If it does not, here's why it doesn't. Have you thought about this? Have you considered this? Would this approach be more interesting? And I always phrase it with questions, because I don't want to give the answers. I only want to be prescriptive in case we are up against a deadline and we've already been through this 4 times and it's got to get fixed now. At that point, I will jump in and say, okay, now here's what it's got to be. But until that point, I will say, here are some ways that you could think about this that are differently. Here are some directions. Now find your solution and bring it back to me. And that, I think, empowers other writers to work with stuff. It gives them a chance to make their contribution instead of trying to read my mind, and it gets better product.
Right. You mentioned starting your career kind of there on Rainbow, and many of the Clancy games had a very distinct campaign, if you will. Like, it was a very clear thing. That's the villain is trying to do this or that, and you got to stop them. But then I also know you wrote for Hunt Showdown for a while, didn't you?
Yes.
And so that's a different type of narrative, I think, right? It's
very much.
It's a very different way of telling a story. So, given that, what do you think is more interesting currently to look at? Because I think we're kind of opening up a new way of storytelling, especially for live games. It used to be fairly scripted and very linear and very directive. And now it's a lot about context and a different type of storytelling. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think either is better. I think it's a new possibility. Let's explore it. Let's do the new thing and see what we can get out of it. I think there's tremendous value in the traditional model of the Golden Path linear campaign, as demonstrated by the latest iteration of God of War, for example. Horizon, Last of Us. There's so many great linear games, and that's just in the AAA space, get down to the indie space, something like, I will stand for What Remains of Edith Finch forever. But again, it's a linear narrative. It's got a throughput, but it's a glorious experience. That being said, something like Hunt, something that's a live game, doesn't have some of the traditional tools of storytelling.
Right.
And I can't have conversations in a game like that. But what I can do is build the world. I can build the characters. I can create the context for the action of the game so players can tell their own stories based on how they identify with the various characters they're playing. And I can set the stage for maybe other stuff to be told in that space, whether it's going to transmedia, whether eventually there's another game out of that. I don't know. I don't work at Crytek anymore. I have no idea of their plans. I'd wish them the absolute best. But speaking generally, the games as a service, live game model, doesn't lend itself to traditional storytelling, but that's okay. It lends itself to other storytelling, and I'm eager to explore that.
Right. On a more personal level, I think you, just like I, have encountered situations where we might have written for a game or a product where we might not have been 100% interested when we started, and then you have to find out a way to immerse yourself and understand what's going on and still give it everything you can. So to the writers out there who might find themselves on a project or working on something that initially doesn't feel like it's their main purpose in life, do you have any tips to those people, how to get into it and how to get past the initial hump?
Research and find your joy. Dig deep into the subject material. Even if you're bouncing off the surface level stuff, if you get into the granular stuff, there's every chance you'll find a gem that you can polish and make your own and use that as a starting point. On Assassin's Creed Nexus, for example, we did the sequence of missions for Connor. And again, this was a very well mapped out character. His story had already really been told in a lot of ways. I didn't see a lot of ways in, but I dug into research at the time and found the Barton Raid, which was an expedition where a bunch of colonial irregulars went off to the summer house, basically, that the local British general was staying at and kidnapped him. And it was a glorious opportunity to tell an Assassin's Creed character story that was historically interesting and that was interesting personally. And so I found my joy there, and I was able to launch from there to other ways I could express that in other bits I was writing there.
Right. Again, kind of from a personal point of view, what do you find most challenging with writing for games? You've been doing it for a long time, but is there still something you find to be a challenge?
It is always a challenge because the ground is always shifting under my feet. There's always new technology. There's always new designs for games. There's always new models. There's always new needs. And so it is a never-ending challenge to be at the tip of the spear, as it were, if I can quote a Ghost Recon thing. And so I enjoy the fact that this is constantly challenging. I find there are a lot of truths that endure. The basic approach to interactive writing, to building characters that make sense for games and things like that. And those carry over from one game to the next and 1 year to the next and even 1 decade to the next. But at the same time, the fact that there is new stuff to write for, that there are new ways to express this, constantly refreshing and keeps it interesting.
So it's interesting that you bring up technology. Talking about AI is something everybody's doing right now. How do you see AI fitting in with narrative and writing? Are you worried? Are you hopeful there's something to take advantage of? What's your view on AI?
Okay, so we only have like a half an hour, so you're not going to get my full rant here. But
no, that's fine.
I find AI antithetical to creating good writing. It is a checkbox. It is not a process. The best art emerges from the iterative process and discovering the best work through creating it. If you just say, give me this, and out pops like food in a Star Trek food dispenser, it is just what it is. There is no thought that has gone into it. There is no love that has gone into it. There is no expression that has gone into it. It is a checkbox, and that all is all. And all it can do is spit out what has been fed into it. And what has been fed into it is, shall we say, dubious in some ways.
Yeah, it all depends on where that AI is trained. And as long as it's trained on the internet, most of it is going to be shit, to be honest, probably.
One of my novels was actually stolen to train AI.
Not surprised.
And which amuses me on multiple levels as well as infuriating me, because the one they stole was called Vaporware, which is about a sentient AI gone rogue. I'm hoping the AI did not learn too much from that one.
So I think I have a few listeners here then who might want to consider becoming writers or want to learn how to write for games, even if they don't want to become full-fledged writers themselves. Do you have any tips for those people?
Yes. First of all, write. Write every day. Build a ritual of writing. And I'm not saying, make sacrifices and conjure dark gods. I'm saying build a habit that tells your brain, now is when I'm going to write. And the more you do that and the bigger you build that, neural pathway, the easier it is to sit down and start writing immediately. The less time you spend just messing around trying to get into that headspace. Write every day. It doesn't matter if what you write is good or not. You're getting practice putting words down in a row. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more you know which ones work and which ones don't. One of my writing mentors, a very fine writer named Mort Castle, took me aside early in my career and said, Rich, the thing you have to understand is your first million words are shit. Get them out of your system as quickly as possible. And he did not mean that word 1,000,001 was suddenly going to be gold. He meant write a lot so you get better and better and better and better. And the longer you delay, the longer it'll take you to get to where you're really doing your best work. Now, as for actually specifically game writing, I would very much urge writing things that are game related. Your story is great. The write-up of your Dungeons and Dragons campaign, awesome. But that doesn't tell me you can write a character description that a concept artist can grab and work with, and then an animator can build a set for, and then an audio engineer can provide a voice for. You could tell me you can write systemic dialogue. Give me 20 variants on, oh no, a grenade. It's not exciting, but it shows you know what is actually going into the game. If you're going to write a cinematic script, write one that is doable in a game space that is not bloated and overwhelming, something that would be more interesting to a player to advance their progression through the game and all that. And the other thing is your portfolio should never be static. It is made of Legos. It is not made of mortared bricks. Pop stuff in and out. You write something better, get an old piece out, put a new piece in. You're applying at a company that does a specific type of game. Make sure you fill your portfolio with stuff that is applicable there. Get rid of the stuff that is not. You can always replace it later. We live in the digital age. All of this stuff is infinitely flexible. Always put yourself in the best position to succeed.
So the last question then, Richard, as a person who has gone to several GDCs, I assume, often with the writer cap on and looking out for other writers, what are the obvious things to do here except for panels and good talks? When in Rome, so to speak, what should you do as an up-and-coming writer at GDC?
Wear comfortable shoes. That is the most important thing. That being said, once you are here, talk to people. Most of the folks are very friendly. If you approach them respectfully and politely and in an open manner, they will probably make time to talk to you. If they don't have time, they will probably say, hey, I can't talk now, but maybe later. Don't be afraid to present yourself. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Do so respectfully. Don't try and monopolize somebody's time. Don't try and tell them what you know and show off. That's not the point. You're here to learn, listen, get in good conversations with people who know things, ask smart questions so you get remembered, but make sure the conversation flows to you and benefits you. Socially, hang out with folks. If you get invited to a group meal, go. Talk to people. Hang out at the Writers Bar, Golden Gate Tap Room, and see other writers there. Make connections. And always, 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 if you have a good conversation that's going when a talk is about to start, stick with the conversation. You can get the talk on the vault, but that conversation will never happen again.
Some great advice there. Thank you, Richard, and have a good rest of the GDC.
Thank you so much. Always wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Now time has come to talk to one of our in-house resources, our own senior narrative lore master, I believe his title is, Jimmy Wilhelmsson. Hey, Jimmy, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Happy to be here.
Well, happy to have you here. Just a brief intro to anyone who does not know Jimmy, which I suppose is most of you. He's worked at Sharkmob for 5 years, started in the middle of the burning pandemic, one of the first people I brought on to Exoborne on the narrative side to help me build the world of that game. Jimmy is old. He's been around. He's worked as an editor at Eurogamer, for example. He's been working in PR in the past. Some Swedes might know him as Spelpappan, the game father, where he shook his head. But he had a pod thing going for a while where he talked about all kinds of gamer-related stuff, did interviews. He's written a series of books. I don't know if there's a proper term for them, but I guess a kind of documentary-style books about Commodore, Generation 64, Generation 500. You did one on comic book ads or comic book commercial stuff, right?
That's true.
And you did the book about Äventyrsspel, which is a Swedish old tabletop gaming brand. The book about Mutant, which is one of the better Swedish RPGs ever, if you ask me. And then the book of Alga.
Yeah.
So what was Alga?
Alga was the national big brand for games, kind of like Parker Bros, who owned Monopoly, or Milton Bradley, also in America, were pretty big. It's usually one of them brands that people in general don't know about, but they know their games, because the brand itself is not important. It's basically what the games they release. That's why.
You actually have an Alga shirt on today.
I do.
Yeah,
you know, we printed that for that book.
And you wrote all of these or some of these with Orval Sävström, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my business partner.
Yeah. Another famous Swedish icon.
Yeah, if you're Scandinavian, you know him from movie reviews and possibly from computer games also. He does those computer game music shows that tour around all of Scandinavia.
Yeah. So that's a bit about your background. Do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, that's the problem when you pass 50. Like, whenever somebody's going to lay out your resume on the table, it takes like 5-10 minutes. That's embarrassing, really.
Well, but it is the truth. And beyond that, of course, you're a father. You play games. You love movies. You read books. You do a lot of narrative stuff.
I'm a comic book reader. I read less fiction nowadays. Many comic books and a lot of fact books, history books, and all that.
Right.
So yeah, all that.
Yeah. So senior, or at least narrative lore master, we can skip senior because that has nothing to do with what you actually do. For those who don't know, what does a narrative lore master do at Sharkmob, at least? What do you do from a day to day?
I mean, it's a very rare role, right? It's not that, I don't know how many people have this position in the world, but basically I feel like I'm keeping track of every little detail in the IP, basically. So I'm not only thinking about one game, but I'm also thinking about how can this be portrayed in a movie? How can you explain this? So I keep track of everything from high to low. I feel like I'm a help in my daily business. Devs come to me and ask me, "Is this okay? I have this idea and I want to check with you because there's so many aspects of lore." And then we talk about that, and that's the fun part of my work. The not so fun part is when sometimes I have to be a naysayer, like, this is a great detail, it's a great thing, but it's probably not for this game or this lore or whatever. I can't decide it, I'm not a director, but I can at least give, hints to that this might be hard to fit in. And sometimes people, a lot of the devs do both of the things. They rely on me and think I'm helpful, and sometimes they probably think I'm a naysayer, stopping creative.
Only because you sometimes are a naysayer, but that's part of the job.
I mean, come on. Creativity benefits from limitations. I put it plain and simple there. That's my first controversial thing in this interview. It was first laid out by my high school teacher in Swedish when we were about to write essays. You remember those?
Yep.
4 hours in anguish in a big room where we were supposed to write something. And we always complained, why do you give us headlines? Because she gave us a headline, write about this, a red thread. And we were like, no, can't we write about whatever, because we want creativity? And she said, and this was etched into my brain, no, your work is worse when you can decide whatever. And I was first like, what? But she's right. And it's come back to me many times all those years from people who are great at writing. And not only writing, but that's why great painters create genres, because it's limits the creativity and forces you to think in in new patterns that you wouldn't if you just have the whole world at your table.
It's interesting you bring that up, because that is exactly one of the reasons you were, after me, the first narrative person to come on board, essentially, because when we started Exoborne, one of the tasks was to create an original IP. And speaking from experience, having worked on games in the past like The Division and Bloodhunt, I knew that things will balloon very quickly in terms of lore, and also people will quickly find themselves in places where they need the expert advice of someone who understands the full lore of the universe we're creating, so things can stick together. And for example, when we worked on Bloodhunt, we got a lot of that for free because we had the rule books of Vampire the Masquerade. So there were so many things that were answered to us, and people could look it up. And sometimes this was a bit before your time, so I filled the role then of the lore master in a way, mostly in assisting people in finding the answers they needed, but also in the dialogue with White Wolf Paradox, who owned the license. Paradox now, White Wolf kind of at the time, but a dialogue with them in what do we need to add to the existing lore that doesn't exist for our gameplay to work. So that was like a back and forth that a narrative lore master typically also does. It's like adjusting whatever you have to fit like the game that you're trying to create. It's basically what you said before. Sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes you have to be very creative in adjusting what you have. And so, yeah, I knew from the start that I needed someone like you who could do that journey with the rest of the team and not just say no, but also adjust. Know which things can we tweak currently and which things have we taken so far that are already integrated in the game and we can no longer change them. We just have to know that they're there and kind of react to those.
Yeah.
So you're not a writer is basically what we're saying in the classic sense, right? You are more than just writing stuff. You are also the keeper of lore.
I'm more than writing or less than writing, depending on who you ask, right? But you're absolutely right, and you're pointing the finger at something that I think is interesting. Is that most lore masters are probably keepers of legal stuff. If you already have an established IP that's been around for decades, basically, then there are certain things that will never ever change unless there is some marketing reason to do so. Whereas this job, as you said, was bringing me in. We have a few pillars. Some of the things were already created, some were already there, and I had to I could challenge them, but probably this is what we been agreeing to, all the directors here. So this is what you have to start off from. But then we kind of create our own rules, or our own inspirational rules, I'd like to call them, that we later try to stick to. Because you're using a pretty good word, balloon. That's what happens. When you're a lot of people, when you're hundreds of people, the collective mind tends to grow and grow anywhere. It's hard to have everyone pull in the same direction if you don't have a set of creative rules or some inspirational rules to follow.
Yeah, I in the onboarding PowerPoint I have that I do with every person we hire at Sharkmob, I have a slide when I talk about how we make IPs and specifically how we made Exoborne. And the slide is one of our first concept art pieces, and it's basically this washed out, completely destroyed, almost barren world, right? And that's what it feels like when you have a new original IP, kind of to the point you made the reference from school and your teacher, but it feels like you can go anywhere and do whatever you want. And that in a way is almost every developer's dream. I can do whatever I want, but it's every company's nightmare, because you have to focus your creative energies as quickly as you can so you can start moving into something that is constructive and building towards a final vision. Because the longer you stay in the we can do whatever we want zone, the more money you burn without actually producing content that you can end up using. So that means to me at least that your role is part of focusing the creative energy of a team, not just saying yes or no to things, but making sure everyone pulls towards the same direction in terms of the things that go into the game. Because you have, like you pointed out, directors, they provide direction, but so many things happen in layers that are more detailed than direction. Because that like direction, it can be super specific, but it can also be quite high level and in a way vague. And if you don't know what the rest of the game looks like, the rest of the world, the rest of the direction, I guess, it's hard to know exactly where to go with things. So that's kind of where I think your role really comes into play and is like a literal game changer in development, because it keeps people on the right track and it answers questions and it makes sure the content that gets produced is relevant to the project we're trying to make.
And it's not new, because even in the games industry, no one can do whatever they want. I would say IP and lore is the third corner of a triangle. The other two are hardware and software, because you have software limits already. Like, our system is not built to do that. It's a common answer. And you of course have the hardware specs as limits also. You can't do whatever you want, because there are certain, it needs to fit into people's hardware that they're running. So it's just another corner store of stuff. This is what we're doing. Inside this triangle is our, this is our golden zone. This is where we make sure everything fits together.
Yeah. So then, given the fact that our team has built this alternate universe from ground up, the universe of Exoborne, without talking about the content piece in specific, what has been the greatest challenge for you in that process over the last 5 years?
I mean, there have been many. It is a game, right? So everybody who works with games know that whatever you set out to build, it's like that with books and movies also, I think. I don't know movies, I haven't worked with movies, but whatever you set out to build in the future, it usually doesn't come out exactly like that. Because you run into issues, you run into things that this maybe doesn't really work, maybe that was not the greatest. So constant changes do affect also the lore. So you have to bear in mind all those things. And also, this is a very without again going into specific, it's a very special world, a very special time. It's not a copy of our own world, but it's a version of it, right? So I wanted to create a timeline, or many timelines, that made sense from both a fantastic perspective and also our own perspective. So I was thankful that I'm not a how should I put it? I'm not an educated writer. I have a master's degree actually in political science, and I come from I'm not a computer programmer, although I grew up with computers. Could have been, but I wasn't. Instead, I fought myself into writing. Worked on from a newspaper editorial from early age, like 1920. So that's where I come from, and I think that helps, because what political science is about is basically the distribution of power within different spheres and how it all fits together. It may sound boring, but sprinkle a little archaeology, which I took in Jerusalem, and all the comic books and all the sci-fi movies and all this and all that, and you can get a pretty cool alternate universe in there, even though it's built upon the world we move in. It's basically the same with Marvel, if you think about it. It's our world, but it's not really our world. Spider-Man is not, swooshing by in New York. Otherwise, Manhattan is kind of well portrayed in those comic books of old. That, I think, was the biggest challenge, but also a challenge that I think I was ready with my knowledge and my experience to take on.
Right. So challenges is one thing, and to me, I enjoy challenges. Someone once asked me, what was the aspect that I enjoyed most about being a director on narrative on a game like the ones we make, which are not necessarily narrative games, they are action games. And so people could think that narrative is it's not an important part of it, although I would disagree with that. I think there are different styles of using narrative, but context always matters, and it's always good to have a story because it makes things more relatable. But someone asked me, it's like, what do you look forward to most? It sounds like it's a difficult job to get things to work, and I was like, what I actually look forward to are the challenges in this, because I like to solve problems, and a narrative story, narrative themes, all of these things, when you try to put them into a game, there's plenty of problems to go around in how you convey your points, how you get the universe to feel alive, how you tell the stories you want to tell, or how you make the themes of your game visible, because clearly from the start we've created quite a detailed framework on what notes we want to hit with Exoborne. We're not going to, obviously that would be the biggest spoilers of this podcast, so we're not going to talk about it here, but there is a goal we've been working towards from the start on things we wanted to do. So if you detail challenges, but what's been most fun then for you? Where have you derived your most pleasure in the work you've done?
That is a tough cookie, actually. I mean, I love going to work. This is Monday when we record this, and I've been off all weekend, and I love coming here on Mondays doing it. I think the most fun is when more and more people come aboard and buy into that whole universe that we've been creating when we were just a small team. I mean, as long as I've been at Sharkmob, we've never been really small, not tiny, but we were working mostly with Bloodhunt at the time. So Exoborne didn't even have a name, and it was not prioritized in the same way. So it's been fun to see how it grows, how new people come in. I mean, new people, you meet, and then you tell about this lore, and they have great new ideas, and they buy into stuff. That's basically, I think, whomever you are, whatever you work with in writing or lore in general, when people take part of your work, and that's not always, this is words. These are words. These are texts. I mean, you're happy. If somebody comes up to me and challenges and says, even though this is crap, then I turn it to an advantage of saying, oh, so you read it. Great. Because, that's the first stage. It's not an image, it's a text. So people might not consume it, and at least not all of it. So that's what's fun, really, when people read it, buy into it, they're going to develop stuff in it, about it, on it, and give me feedback. And it's even more fun, I mean, if we go all the way, because again, we've said it a couple of times, the IP, the lore, all the logic is not just for one game. It's there to fit for, a long time in the first run, live, the whole live phase, but also what can we do if this goes into more formats? What can we make a comic book out of it? What would you do if you made a movie of it? Just plan. Not even though this is not in the plans, it still is for me, because I want to be able to make sure that the lore is not too small, or that we burn it all in one game or whatever, that it can feed you inspiration so you can make something else on top of that lore. That's a very broad answer, I know, but that's basically what drives me all day. What can we do out of it? What will people do once they get it?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. And it's also probably important to a job like yours. I was sitting here thinking, you started off saying that the exact title you have, the exact job description is quite rare. But I think there's probably always someone on a dev team whose job it is to create lore or look after lore, or they might be a writer, they might be a producer, they might be, it can be many things depending on what a studio looks like. But there's always someone whose job it is to kind of create that framework, because we do know that it is important in a lot of games, and it does make a lot of games feel more engaging and immersive if there is this sense of tightness of things being an actual place, an actual world. It's a lot to me it has to do with playing with people's expectations. Like when I walk into a room or I board a spaceship or whatever I do in a game, the things I see will immediately speak to me and what I will then expect that I can do in that place, in that room, on that ship. Depending on what I see, I will want to do different things. And so someone must have really planted that initial seed and then make sure it is actually delivered later in the level design and the mission design, that initial expectation you have. There's an old game, I don't even remember its name anymore. I think it was for the Amiga. It was one of these corridor games based on Aliens, Basically, you landed on a space colony or a spaceship. Something had gone wrong with some monster, and you had to explore and go on board this thing. And one of the first things you did was actually look out from an airlock-like structure with windows that overlooked the colony.
Is it a 3D game?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could see things in the distance. It might have been called Xenomorph or something like that. I'm
there
not
is
sure.
a game called Xenomorph. Yeah, definitely.
It could be that, but I'm
All right.
not sure. But this is hazy and old.
Okay. That's
as I
beginning of
describe it.
90s.
I feel it reminds me a bit about Doom, actually,
Right.
something Doomish about looking out over a colony. But it's basically the same trick, because it's revealing something to you that you want to see, or that you want. What is that thing? I want to go there, and I want to find out what that thing does.
Yeah.
And so if I then get there and it does nothing, that's a bit underwhelming. So clearly there's a bit of work here about setting up the scene and then talking to the people creating it and then making sure you have gameplay heading over there. So assuming then that that's part of what you do and it's part of your responsibility, how do you work with the team to achieve this? Is there anything, like any tips you can give to people? How do you really make sure this chain of content sticks together?
Yeah, that's of course one of the tough parts, because you can, as I said, you can write whatever you want. If it doesn't end up in the game, it's not really there it's in the writing, but that's it. Basically, I mean, I try to be. I don't really belong to one team. I mean, of course, the narrative team, but I also work.
No, you belong to me, Jimmy, but I
Right,
borrow
yeah.
you to the other teams.
Damn it, now it's official. No, but I try to contact and talk to a lot of people, because I know that this kind of writing, even if I write it or a writer writes it, it's still something that we have to do in unison. Because, I mean, to be fair, if you have a very good dev, a very creative dev, and you come with ideas that clearly don't fit and you don't care, they're not going to do it the way you want it. It's going to be, they're going to pretend they're doing it, but they're going to do something else. And that's a disaster. That's also why, if I can derail a little, I mean, I come from journalism. I know a lot of writers, and I've been writing books, but not fictional books. Journalists and writers are generally great at this. What they're not great at sometimes is cooperating, because an author is used to deciding pretty much everything. Of course, they have their editor and stuff, but they still decide anything.
They realize their own vision, essentially.
Yeah, and and that's the way it should be. And journalists are the same. Even though they write for a traditional paper or whatever, every journalist is responsible for their own text. So the editor is just, putting them together, and rarely have any feedback on the actual article or the content of the article, because that's the journalist's work. But here it's very different. I mean, I have an idea, I have the lore, I have the world, but it has to fit with what everyone else is doing. So I have to listen. I have to be prepared to be challenged. And sometimes my arguments stand, and sometimes they're just, okay, this does not work. At least not here. Then maybe I put it back into my drawer, keep it for later, because maybe this is something, maybe this is a detail that we can bring out, in another game or in a book or whatever.
Or
and
realize in another way if given
Sure.
an opportunity. Yeah.
Or just scrap it all together and place it in failed stuff. So basically, it's a boring word, but communicate and talk to people and get their real opinion of what we're trying to do here. Because we're all responsible for the IP. And every time you have an IP, you have the opportunity to work on an IP that is new. I mean, how many times does that happen? Normally for game devs, you have the opportunity to create this thing that other people might work on in the future, if it gets licensed or whatever. And that to me is astounding. So make sure everybody is on board, and it's really hard.
Yeah, and that's also that kind of brings you to another question, which is also interesting, in that a lot of things you do for video games, you can A/B test, or you can see the stats on it, like how do people move over your map, where do they pick up the weapons. You can tell what gameplay works by testing it.
Yeah.
Telling what world building works or what story works by testing it is super difficult, because again, it's not just testing a bunch of words on paper. You can do that, but that's not testing a game. That's testing a text. Testing a game is like a combination of characters, voiceover, location, timing, mission design. A bunch of stuff goes into how we kind of communicate our stuff. So how do you know that the decisions you make are the right decisions?
Usually,
this is going to go into your annual interview, by the way. But
I mean, to be fair, you don't. That's why there are failed IPs and failed worlds out there, and you really don't. But what you can do is try to offer it piecemeal. I mean, you have great big IPs. We all know what they are, like Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, and they feel. The people responsible feel if you give them time enough, they feel like, oh, they like this NPC, Boba Fett. They didn't care about Boba Fett, but it became popular among people. So pick up on that. Listen. Keep your ear close to the railway. That's a Swedish expression. I have no clue if that's is there an English equivalent.
I'm pretty sure it comes from Western TV shows or something. So I'm sure there's an equivalent.
Listen to what they like and don't like, and try to act on that if you can, because you're not supposed to only make a game that the audience loves, but because sometimes the audience doesn't know really what they want. But you should definitely, if they do love something or hate something, you should definitely act upon it.
I think you brought up something very interesting there, which is a lot of IPs don't work initially.
Yeah.
It's something you build over time. I think the whole idea of creating a smash hit from scratch, and it's going to be a hit day one on release.
And endure.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of it's not an impossibility, but you're definitely setting yourself up for a challenge.
Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the IPs that did work, they only worked over time. They only worked because the people working on those IPs reacted to what the audience enjoyed, and they reacted to the changing of times, and they reacted to a lot of factors. Like, you could argue that the Marvel I grew up with in the 80s is not necessarily the same Marvel we have today. It's not even the same Marvel that we had in the 90s. There were rapid changes in storylines, in characters, in spandex outfits, in all kind of things to kind of match an audience expectation.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I feel like there's a lot of weight put on creating that smash hit even before you reach your audience, which I think is super difficult. I think the trick should be get something out there that is just a bit more than good enough, and then keep working on it to find what resonates with your audience, put out more of that content. Boba Fett was a perfect example. I remember watching the early Star Wars movies, and Boba Fett always stood out to me as one of the most interesting characters.
And he has like two
Yet
lines.
He does nothing. He's just a prop. He's a filler, right? But he was by far one of, I guess, the coolest designed characters, but then also one of the coolest fantasies, because he's this mercenary bounty hunter with a rocket pack on his back,
and an armor,
cool-looking helmet, and a gun.
Yeah.
And he is in fact so badass that he doesn't have to say anything, except for possibly scream when he flies into the mouth of the Sarlacc there. But very interesting idea to consider, this whole generating IP smash hit. I think it has worked for some games. They become big hits quickly, but that has also often been connected to other factors, like they were maybe the launch game of a new console, or they were heralding a new type of technology or gameplay. And the whole creation of IP goes beyond narrative and lore. It's so much more than that. An IP is not just story. It's not just characters. It is the entire package around it, which is what makes it so very, very complicated. And also, I guess, often why it's not necessarily a writer, but a legal person or some exec who is like responsible for IP. On and off, I've had the title IP director. And I struggle with which to use, IP or narrative, because IP to me is you could you could say world building director, because that's actually how I view it. The intellectual property of everything. But as soon as you put IP in your title,
It's legal.
all lawyers in the world start contacting you for selling their services and telling you how they can help you regulate the trademarks and copyrights and all of that stuff. And that's not at all what I do. I'm more of a legal liability than any type of legal guardian.
I just want to say also with the failed IPs or worlds, history gets smeared out. When we sit here, maybe in 8 to 10 years, and talk about this, whatever whatever the success, we're gonna not remember some things and exaggerate other things. I think it's really hard to pick out IPs that were successful from the start. I mean, and has been so for a long time. Star Trek did not start with a boom. It became a cult series and then came back, but not in the start. And Star Wars, I mean, I was young in the 80s. By around 87, 88, 89, Star Wars was dead. It was gone. It was lame. It was only...
We were all nerds because we had Star Wars
I
figurines.
know, but the figures, that sale plummeted, and it was kept alive by role-playing games and writers, the expanded universe writers like Timothy Zahn, who later picked up on it. It became badass again in the 90s when the new movies came out, and first the remastered ones. So history gets smeared out, and it's really, if you're not careful, it's easy to see everything as a straight curve when you look at it in history, because we all kind of lie about our past. We try to tone down our failures, right?
And we deceive ourselves a bit. I mean, that's the common thing with some of these long-running, very big IPs. It's like, it's always interesting to me to see how people desperately, and by people I mean, anyone on the internet essentially, but trying to reverse engineer or retro justify things that happens in that universe that are quite clearly just the result of things changing over time. It has nothing to do with the logic of that universe. That's completely irrelevant for why that decision was made. It was made because they needed to change an actor, or because technology now allowed them to do something way flashier than before, so they added that to a universe where it otherwise might not have existed. There's a lot of practicalities that end up being part of these fictional worlds, but I also think that's kind of cool, because that allows for that evolution, and it keeps us on our
totally
toes, right?
Legit in my book.
And it's sometimes you shouldn't look for meaning or try to justify everything in a made up universe, because some of it is random, or a lot of it is random actually, because it's also technically the work of many collaborators over time. And very few of them had a Jimmy who was sitting there for 40 years saying yes, yay or nay to questions. But people would have to look at, okay, this is what the last X movies were like, or the last comics, or the last books. You have no real idea what the intent of the creator was, only what the actual output is.
Yeah.
And then you kind of try to stick to that, right? That's part of the challenge. Now we are in the opposite seat. We know exactly what we want to create, but it's hard to create it because there are other people involved, and you have to communicate things. You have to compromise. A lot of compromise.
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't get that extra character you wanted, or that location you were hoping for. You couldn't do that piece of environmental storytelling you needed to do. Something ended up getting cut that you had relied on. All of that happens in game production. That's by no means unique to anything we do, but it constantly affects how you tell a story.
And I learned pretty quickly, I mean, when I was much younger, to bury your pride. There are some solutions that are better than yours. It doesn't mean that you're worthless. It means that, I didn't think about that. Perhaps it was your initial idea that made somebody else think about it. That means you're part of that decision. It doesn't mean that whatever you wrote or came up with is bad. It might not even be bad. Maybe it's just another game, another IP. Save it till later. So that's also an advice I have. Bury the pride, or whatever term you want to use.
Kill your darlings. Another
kill your darlings. That's
yeah.
one thing. But also, you're not useless just because that thing you had was not whatever we ended up with.
No, I think you have to view it as a collaborative process where you might do the first rungs of the ladder and someone else jumps in and completes it all the way up to the roof.
Right.
And that's how you have to view it. And that also means that some of the things can change along the way, but you have to kind of keep your eye on the end result and recognize, realize, embrace the fact that you're doing it together with other people. Because if there's one thing that can quickly kill quality and creativity is in a team is when someone has the mandate to just blankly say no. So then you either have to structure your entire operation around that person making every minute decision, or they just can't be allowed to do that. You have to trust your experts, your creators, your implementers, that they know what they're doing. And if they have a better idea than you do, then they probably should be listened to.
Yeah.
Because again, with teams of these sizes, and also the complex dynamic of experts, like we need so many experts in different areas. It would be foolish of any one of us who are not an expert in an area to think we know things better than they do in that specific area. And if that area affects what we do, we have to listen to them. We have to, be smart about it.
Be smart.
Be smart.
That's
a good tip. Is there anything else you want to bring to the mix here today? Anything you think we should be talking to people about in general?
I mean, a lot of when I speak to people, I mean, generally when I'm at dinners and whatever, I tend not to talk so much about what I'm doing, because it usually raises a lot of questions that I don't want to sit there and just talk about me. So I'm the one asking questions. You're a firefighter. How does that work out? Blah, blah, blah. But I mean, one of the first questions is usually, how do you get into that role? How do you get hired as a lore master? And basically, I have no clue, but you have to. My way in was, like we said, I was a normal kid born in the 70s, played role-playing games and read comic books. So stories were constantly fed to me. And I think that's one good advice. Keep stories coming to you. Short stories, long stories, whatever. But if it's movies, if it's anecdotes that people tell each other, it doesn't matter. And if it's articles or whatever, keep them coming and try to write them better. Do something better. Write a lot. Write articles. Write whatever. We live now in a world where you can write to the whole... there's a lot of noise out there, but you can write to the whole world immediately. When we were kids and I wanted to get into newspapers, I had to walk over there and knock at the door and say, hey, I want to work here, and try to fool myself in. But we have opportunities now, since end of the 90s, basically, where you can just write or do whatever. And this is no news, but I mean, keep exposing yourself to this, because it really comes down to stories, ideas, logic. Most of what you produce or hear is going to be crap, but you can't really find gold unless you sift through the dirt. I just made that thing up. But
you also asked a question that we actually have an answer to, because I'm the one who hired you, so I know why I hired you. So I know what the prerequisites are. And I obviously, with the hiring manager's bias set aside, what I was looking for was someone with low or no ego, background in storytelling, that had a fairly big social competence, because it is, again, I understood early on with the ambition level we had that we would be working with a very big team. It would be a very collaborative effort. So it needed to be someone who was flexible, who understood the basics of storytelling, who had experience in writing, telling stories in different ways, and interest in the type of settings we were doing, and someone who was then willing and able to kind of take on that fairly daunting challenge. And the way I already had in mind when I put that position, I was actually hoping you would be the one who took it. We approached you with it because I knew you a bit, but I didn't know you a lot. I'd run across you.
Yeah.
Basically, you were a journalist and I was a PR manager, and I got to know you there. And then I was tangentially following what you were doing in other areas, because you were putting yourself out there. You were kind of exposing some of the stuff you did to the world, so people could see, this is what he does, this is who he is, this is what I get when I buy this package. I get this Jimmy. And so I think to get back to your point and make it condensed, it's like if you apply for a job like this, you have to be interested in telling stories. Not a story, but stories in general, because you're not going to be telling your story. That's very rarely the case. You're going to tell some type of story, but you have to be interested in storytelling in different kinds, meaning you have to have a fairly good grasp of different medium, like books, movies, it's not necessarily so that you have to have written a book or directed a movie, but you need a deep understanding of those different things, and of course of games. But then beyond that, it is also this thing which is, I think to your point, it's fairly easy these days to prove you can do some of these things, because you can do your own podcast, you can do your own YouTube channel where you analyze narrative and you talk about things, and it doesn't matter if you get 46 followers or 4 million followers. When I look at your content, I'm not judging you as a marketing specialist. I'm judging you in your analysis of the stuff you put out there. So if nothing else, view it as your own dynamic CV or portfolio where you put up these clips continuously. And that was what Spelpappan kind of did for you. You did interviews with people. You could ask questions. It was clear that you had a grasp for what you were doing. Is Spelpappan known outside of Sweden? No, definitely not. It didn't have to be. It wasn't the point. But
I get a few fans from Germany.
Yeah, well, it helped you. It helped you when you applied for a job, right? So I think if nobody knows anything about you, you have to expose yourself to some degree to show a bit about who you are, because any job you apply for, and this is the sad reality of it, is that position is bound to get many applications.
Yeah.
And in this case with Jimmy, like I said, we kind of headhunted him, hoping he would take the bait here, which he did. But in general, we tend to get a lot of applications for any job we put out there. And so it really matters to prove your passion, prove your interest, prove not just your direct skill set, but your ability to understand the product or the work we're trying to do. And like Jimmy said, you have all the tools at your fingertip actually to get this done these days. It's fairly easy to make yourself known in a way that make you stand out a bit. And when I say stand out, I'm not even sure I'm meaning stand out. I mean, it makes you expose yourself in a way so people know who they're hiring, what they're getting, because that's quite helpful for someone who's hiring someone.
You have a good point with the follower thing, because again, in some ways, people are sheep. I mean, somebody has a lot of followers, they're bound to get more followers just because they have a lot of followers. That's basically how PR and marketing works too. But I mean, if you can totally find somebody who, again, like you said, had 47 followers, but they have this interesting thing that is not popular yet, but it might fit whatever you're after.
Yeah.
So,
and typically what sells and get you followers is not necessarily the hallmark of what makes you a good coworker or in any way indicative of great craftsmanship or great trade. The things that go viral, the things that hit, they can be very silly. I'm sure there's at least one channel out there with millions and millions of followers and viewers who only have silly cat clips around the clock on loops with a good marketing algorithm in the background. And there are also streamers out there who are extremely knowledgeable in their respective fields and do deep dive analysis, and maybe they only have 1,500 people watching it, but those 1,500 people love what they're doing and it's fantastic quality content. So it kind of depends on what you're after, but in general I think it's never a loss to put yourself out there if you have a goal in mind. Kind of show the world that you exist and that you're there and that you're interested in it. It's not going to hurt you to do it.
Hopefully.
So now we actually, I have this idea that might either spark initial dialogue or it will turn out to be the end of this conversation. I'm going to bring in one of my producer helpers, Rochelle, who's here today. She's going to get to ask us a series of questions that you and I will respond to, Jimmy. Basically this or that questions. And maybe that brings us to an area where we spend another hour talking about stuff, or maybe we conclude that we now exposed ourselves enough for the day. So let's see where we land.
Hi guys.
Hey.
First of all, I just have to clarify, we usually say keep your ear to the ground. It's kind of the same. So maybe
the railroad is more dangerous, though. I mean, once you have your head there,
as long as you're looking up once in a while, you should be fine.
Okay, so that was my first question: ground or railroad?
Railroad, definitely.
Railroad, yeah.
But we obviously have two very esteemed guests here or people in the studio, Martin and
Where
Jimmy.
are they? Who? Yeah.
So I have a very serious first question. Elves or dwarves?
If Jimmy answers anything but what I answer now, I'm going to be so disappointed, because people who don't know what Jimmy looks like, they're going to get it. But to me, it's obviously dwarves.
I'm such a dwarf person.
Yeah,
I was when I read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid, I was so angry that they're all, losing every war. Doesn't matter who they fight, they always lose, and they cry and they tear their beards. And in my mind, when I played role-playing games, dwarves were like, they were small little hulks.
Yeah, of course they were.
Yeah.
Their stats were telling you that, Jimmy. But also anyone, like, just if you look at Jimmy, he has the most fantastic dwarf beard, classic fantasy warrior dwarf beard. So obviously dwarf. So for the same reason you gave, I think what I liked most about the dwarf archetype in a way were that they were these robust, reliable components to any story or any team, right? They would carry anything at any point. They would always be there, whereas the elves were kind of just flinging around, jumping, shooting, doing whatever elves do. But
I mean, elves are there, at least, I mean, it's also tainted by Tolkien, right? Both elves and dwarves and gnomes and whatever they come from obviously different oral traditions and cultures, but in what I tend to think about are the Lord of the Rings versions, and elves are supposed to be arrogant and dwarves are supposed to be losing and greedy and gold digging. Like it's basically just emotions and features, these different cultures or races, or I don't remember what words he used for them. But
so it would have been telling if one of you would have chosen elves, maybe.
Well, it's
nobody did, so we don't have to.
Okay,
elves or balrogs.
And this is why I love working here, because that was a perfectly legitimate question.
Yep.
Next, so. Writer's room chaos or solo cave of creativity?
You can go first, Jimmy.
I'm from the newspaper industry. I do not mind if there is chaos going on. People are loud, people are yelling, people are talking. I absolutely do not mind. So I'm totally into the chaos thing. I'm going to be so... No, I will not. But I think you should be able, as a writer, it's better if you can focus your mind, even though people are yelling around you, because you're going to be in those environments sooner or later.
Yeah, out of chaos comes order, so I'm fine with it being chaotic from time to time. But what I really enjoy is the collaborative process of working with other people. So writer room chaos.
I can add, I hate writing to music. No music.
No,
shut up to music.
That's a bit distracting.
But whereas talking is not. That's weird. But I think it has helped.
That is weird.
Yeah.
But this is one when it comes to writing, at least for me, this is an interesting. Now I'm going to put Rochelle on pause a bit, because this is what I was hoping she would trigger some funny discussion. But that's one thing that I often struggle with, is that my urge to write can hit me definitely in the off-hour period of a working day, because I very much get an urge to write stuff or explore stuff or detail stuff, whatever it is, at the most odd, peculiar times. I think I guess everyone works differently, but when my mind strays to certain areas, it can trigger this urge to write something. I just have this idea, right? So that to me is one of the bigger challenges with having a job where you're supposed to be creative. I can't be creative on demand. My creativity sometimes comes and goes. Like some days I don't feel it. And then of course, hopefully you have some menial tasks you can do that don't require you to be creative that day. But other points you can get hit by this creative tsunami, right? Where you just write out stuff in record time and just get it down and get it nailed. And unfortunately for people at times this happens late in the evening. So that's just part of the thing. But the chaos of the writing room at least helps you to stay on track a bit, even if it sounds contradictory, or at least in the room with those people at the time, and it can help creativity. So
We are boringly agreed
Yeah,
everything,
well,
right?
It's only the beard that sets us apart.
Am I unpaused now?
No, you're unpaused. Yeah.
For those of you listening, Martin did a gesture of like he was actually pressing a pause button.
Yeah, of course. Animated, yeah.
Okay, maybe this will divide you. Coca-Cola or coffee while brainstorming?
While brainstorming? Yeah, I don't drink soda. I only drink it if I have alcohol in it. So definitely coffee. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons I was contemplating whether to hire him or not at all. It's like Coca-Cola, anyone who knows me, obviously Coca-Cola, and not just for brainstorming, but just to keep alive, to keep going. Coca-Cola, yeah.
I don't know if this is controversial to ask, but Dungeons and Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade?
I'm going to go first.
Oh.
Dungeons and Dragons. Although I love both, but for different reasons.
I mean, I'm going to keep this short, but Scandinavia and Germany were one of those few places in the world where Dungeons and Dragons did not hit off immediately in the end of the 70s or the beginning of the 80s, because they had their own brands. They were pretty quick on creating their own domestic RPGs in Swedish and German. So I haven't played too much Dungeons and Dragons in tabletop, but a lot of it in computer games, because that's obviously where you were kind of force-fed it. I'm not a huge fan of vampires. I remember telling Martin when we were speaking about, can I say this? When we were talking about getting hired, I was like, I think I did admit to you, I'm not a huge fan of vampires. I'd prefer, I mean, is this about vampires? Then I'm not your guy. Because it's not me. I'm more a werewolf guy, if that is a question.
We knew it wasn't about vampires
yeah,
at that point, so that's why it wasn't
I'd say
held
Dungeons and
against
Dragons too.
But and to be honest, a bit sloppily, when I say Dungeons and Dragons, half my mind is actually straying towards Dragons and Demons, which is the Swedish version of Dungeons and Dragons, Dark Aldermonal. It's in my mind, those are a bit synonymous because they're very similar gaming universes, and what I like about them is that I guess a bit to your point, Jimmy, they're not just vampires. They're not just X whatever. It's broad open worlds where you can play almost any scenario you like. Vampire the Masquerade is a bit more confined to me. It's more specific in the universe that you're playing.
Yeah.
And so I spent most of my time as a dungeon master, so I prefer that wider range of themes, topics, and components to build campaigns with.
And Vampire the Masquerade is a great IP. It's just not my IP.
I mean,
I would lie if
it's
I
fantastic.
said so.
It's just very different. And actually, when my experience with Vampire the Masquerade before we made our own game of it was actually very LARP oriented. I played it very little as a tabletop type RPG and more as the larger scale reenactment of scenarios. So
you like biting people?
I'm not.
Who doesn't, Jimmy?
Yeah, who doesn't? Let's leave it there.
That was kind of leading me into my next question about Dungeon Master or Forever Player.
Yeah, I'm sadly the Forever Dungeon Master.
I'm not the Forever Dungeon Master. I was a Dungeon Master from time to time, but so Forever Player is wrong. I would have to say Dungeon Master too, but we actually switched. We were a couple of guys who took on the role from time to time, but and some were Forever Players, but I was not one of them. So I would say DM also.
Yeah, my problem was typically I started out as Dungeon Master. I did that for a lot of years, and very rarely would I actually play. I would mostly DM for this one group, and then I switched groups to another group of friends who had their own DM, and it was difficult to be a player when you knew so much about the DMing. It just became a bit weird. So
I can picture that.
I did a lot of playing, but I was always more comfortable as a DM. I had more fun as a DM.
You were like, actually, it's D20.
Exactly. Let's stay to the... But then you forget rules 1 and 2, right? The DM is always right.
That's the wrong table.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, guys, this is the last question for today. Moral ambiguity or clear good versus evil?
Oh, I love moral ambiguity because that's more close to life for me than good versus evil. But to be honest, the more fun is, of course, playing with usurping expectations and whatnot. There's always the perception of good and evil, and then you get to play around with that. But I think it's never as clear cut as Lord of the Rings. This is your bad guy, this is your good guy.
Yeah.
I don't think that's as fun.
I mean, are we in general what we love, or for Exoborne? Yeah, because I those are both great to me, but they're in very different IPs. I mean, moral ambiguity, it's a hard word, is of course great to create stories and worlds where the player or the consumer of it has to think about it. Maybe they even find out, like, wait a minute, I could do that, what the villain is doing. I can totally agree to some of the points. Whereas, I mean, good versus evil are clear and easy. So there, in those scenarios, you put the complicated parts somewhere else, not in the chess, I'd like to call it. Like, you got white and you got black. That's not good and evil, but they're clearly opposing forces. That it could be red or blue or whatever. But when you have opposing forces, you make it easy, and then you put the complexity somewhere else. So that's a hard one. But I do love the playing with morality more, as I think most writers or anyone who creates lore would say. No?
Probably. But then it's always fun to create a good villain that is clearly evil.
Yeah.
I like to play good guys in most games, but I love creating villainous characters.
Sure. It almost feels religious to me. Like there it's very clear that we are the good guys, or even in Satanism, like we're the bad guys, which makes it good guys because the good guys are like whatever. But it's almost a religious connotation to me.
Yep. So thank you very much, Rochelle, for jumping in and helping us with that. I think we are pretty much done here now, Jimmy. So I'm going to release you back into the world of production so you can go make wonderful worlds and finish Exoborne. Thank you for coming, Jimmy.
Thank you for having me again. It was fun, and I was scared for your question. It sounded more horrifying when you said it.
I gave you a very poor example in the beginning to scare you a bit, but seems it worked. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, thank you to Richard and Jimmy. It was nice catching up with old and current co-workers and friends about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, narrative in video games. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Line of Fire. Hope you'll join us for the next one.